Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Almost 80 years ago, the United Nations Charter was born and laid the foundations of our organisation to preserve future generations from the scourge of war. The founders then had a firm conviction that there was no power more legitimate than that we vested collectively in this new international organisation. Over the last 2 days, I have participated, alongside many of you, on the initiative of the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, in the Summit of the Future. Between hope and concern, this summit allowed us to grasp just how much work we still need to do to leave a harmonious and peaceful future to our children. While we are facing an increasing number of challenges, we're currently seeing a multiplication of regional conflicts, an uptick in the arms race and nuclear proliferation, as well as an ebbing of our collective security. Extreme violence and conflicts that are currently raging, and the thousands of victims that they're claiming in the four corners of the world are intolerable. Targeted attacks against civilian infrastructure that don't even spare schools or hospitals are flagrant violations of the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. Similarly, the use of famine as a weapon of war is an odious crime. These acts must not go unpunished. Whatever the conflict or the continent that it is taking place on, international justice must establish the crimes and prosecute those responsible. This is absolutely essential to build a just and lasting peace. The partition of the world that we're seeing currently is very concerning. Now should not be the time for war or division, but rather for building coalitions, for concrete actions, ramping up cooperation, solidarity, helping each other, and engaging in dialogue. My country's conviction has always been that the way of multilateralism is the only way possible. The UN is at the heart of multilateralism, and it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to implement the roadmap that we adopted collectively. As we committed last year at the summit on the SDGs, and yesterday at the Summit of the Future, we must move away from the way of destruction and focus on the way that leads to prosperity. The new agenda for peace is blazing a trail for us to show more solidarity and to establish trust. The milestones that have already been put down, and they are showing us the way to go. The 4th UN Conference on Financing for Development that will take place next year compels us to rethink the international financial architecture and to help countries to undertake more sustainable and inclusive development. The World Social Summit that will also take place next year should give us the necessary driving force for more social justice and to contribute to fighting poverty, which is number 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable development as a whole will not be achieved, and it will not achieve the desired results if we do not include women and girls. While we're celebrating in 2025 on the 125th anniversary of Resolution 1325 of the Security Council on Women, Peace and Security, and on the other hand, the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Programme of Action, it must be recalled that gender equality has still not been reached insofar as rights, responsibilities and opportunities. It is only by guaranteeing their rights in all of the SDGs and in the actions of the Pact for the Future that we will be able to achieve more justice and inclusion. Step by step, and whatever the cost, we must hold true to our efforts to promote the rights of women and to ensure gender equality. Mr. President, let us make no mistake. The most threatening challenges for humanity on the long term are, without a doubt, the multi-dimensional environmental crisis that we're going through, and must I recall, we're responsible for that. Climate change, the erosion of biodiversity and ecosystems, as well as the huge amount of pollution that is affecting both the land and the ocean, the cradles of life, are turning upside down the daily lives of millions of people and causing considerable economic loss. We, in the face of this tragedy of the commons, we cannot show any doubt or dejection. We must be clear-headed when it comes to all of the things we must do, and we must be optimistic when it comes to the future. Indeed, we now have several international instruments, major ones, that must guide us when navigating this storm. We have the Paris Agreement, the Global Framework for Biodiversity of Kunming-Montreal, and the BBNJ Agreement, and I hope that a new international agreement will come about as well on plastic pollution in the world. These crises require coordinated response, and when we participate in the different international fora over the next few months, let us bear this in mind and engage in unified and concerted action. In Colombia, first of all, we have the COP16 of the UN Conference on Biodiversity, where we have high hopes to deal with the challenges, to implement the plan for biodiversity and to deliver our 2050 vision, living in harmony with nature. Finally, at the end of the year, at the COP29, we have the UNFCCC conference in Baku, and we will establish a new collective goal for climate financing for developing countries that should be up to the needs and be realistic and operational. Creating the conditions for guaranteeing the right to a future in a healthy environment requires us to put an end to the upheaval of our ecosystems, and also to show wisdom and knowledge, and draw on the wisdom and knowledge of men and women present on the ground already suffering the consequences. For example, small island developing states that are particularly vulnerable to the consequences of rising sea levels, and they could potentially disappear. We could see a disappearance of habitable and productive lands, and that's a real threat for their existence. The Principality of Monaco and its institutions committed to the preservation of the oceans is supporting the creation of an international panel of experts for ocean sustainability that would be headed by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. In this regard, we call upon all states to ramp up the process to ratify the BBNJ agreement coming into force in 2025, which is an important year for the planet, with France hosting the 3rd UN conference on the oceans in Nice. This conference should enable us to ramp up our actions and to mobilize all stakeholders to provide lasting solutions that we need for the ocean to overcome the challenges we face. The blue economy is also playing a key role, and the Principality intends to collaborate actively by hosting in June 2025 the Blue Economy and Finance Forum. Finally, beyond the framework provided by the BBNJ, I reaffirm the commitment of my country to the implementation of solid regulation grounded in the best scientific data, ensuring effective protection of the marine environment before we see any mineral exploitation of the seabeds. Ultimately, these interconnected crises compel us to completely rethink our relationship with nature, which is essential for our survival and well-being. Mr. President, when it comes to the challenges and changes that humanity is facing, the development of artificial intelligence is unavoidable. The emergence and the rise of this new technology is accompanied by so many opportunities for our daily lives, but it also comes with dangers, and we must deal with these. The Principality of Monaco is committed to seizing the possibilities provided by safe, secure and trustworthy artificial intelligence systems for sustainable development. Indeed, the staggering technological progress that we're seeing can help to increase development, as well as it could provide fertile ground for organised crime and terrorism. So it's incumbent upon the international community now to establish the right regulations imposing ethical use of this technology that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms, and ensure that it is not used or diverted for military or terrorist purposes. Further, disinformation today is one of the most insidious dangers for our societies. It is spreading rapidly, fed by social networks and digital platforms, sowing confusion and eroding trust in institutions and media. The consequences of this manipulation of information are grave, and they can include the destabilization of our states and the exacerbation of international tensions. It is therefore essential to bolster verification mechanisms, fact verification mechanisms, to protect the truth and to preserve the health of our democracies. Mr. President, we have the tools we need, whether they be legal, technological or scientific, to bring lasting and effective solutions to our contemporary challenges. The Pact for the Future and the 80th anniversary of the UN in 2025 offer us up an historic and unique opportunity to make progress in the intergovernmental process to reform the Security Council to make our organisation more inclusive and representative of current realities in order to resolve the crises that we face. While the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games in Paris were a resounding success, the athletes showed us that efforts and perseverance, including in adversity, lead to victory. They gave us a lesson of humility by teaching us that while victory is the ultimate goal, the journey and good competition are equally as important accomplishments. Let us therefore commit together with a sense of determination to the process that we have defined, step by step. Let us overcome the obstacles without ever losing sight of our goal, which is to preserve peace between nations and to guarantee the well-being of the peoples of the United Nations. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Sovereign Prince of Monaco. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency David Renbok Adeg, President and Head of State of the Republic of Nauru. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. As the President of the Republic of Nauru, a small island nation with a vision for a more equitable and sustainable future, I bring you warm greetings from the government and the people of Nauru. In this 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, we gather at a time of unprecedented global challenge and opportunity. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, Nauru remains committed to the principles of sovereignty, self-determination and international cooperation that have guided our collective progress since the UN's founding. Mr. President, as a nation surrounded by the ocean, Nauru has a vested interest in the responsible stewardship of the ocean's marine resources. We have been at the forefront of international efforts to protect and sustainably use the ocean's resources, including developing and adopting the BBNJ agreement and exploring the wealth of the deep seabeds mineral resources in line with our objectives under the 2050 Blue Pacific Strategy. The greatest risk we face is not the potential environmental impacts of mineral recovery, but the risk of inaction. There is a risk of failing to seize the opportunity to transform to renewable energy and to decarbonize our planet. We cannot let fear and misinformation hold us back. Instead, we must use the knowledge we have gathered wisely to ensure that deep-sea mineral recovery, under the principle of the common heritage of mankind, does not compromise the integrity of our marine environment. This is not just an economic opportunity, it is an environmental imperative. We therefore call on the international community not to ignore the science and progress we have made. Instead, we urge you and the International Seabed Authority Council to work with us to establish and adopt robust regulations necessary for the conservation and sustainable use of marine resources. We have the science, we have the technology, and we have the imperative. Let us rise to the challenge and opportunity before us, employing our investments for the good of all, and let the time for action be now. Mr. President, Nauru's story is not one of despair, but of resilience. Our people have thrived for centuries, living in harmony with the land and the sea. Today we adapt, we innovate, and we persevere. We are exploring new frontiers because even as we fight against the effects of climate change, we must also adapt to the reality that is upon us. Through initiatives like the Higher Ground Project, we are reclaiming land, strengthening our infrastructure, and securing our future. Adaptation initiatives to address modern challenges and concerns demand more than technical expertise. They require substantial financial resources, which is an ongoing struggle. When it comes to climate finance, we are too often relegated to the back of the queue. We must also address the critical issue of access to basic financial services. For nations like Nauru, equitable access to banking is not merely a convenience, it is a lifeline. Yet we face the growing threat of de-risking and the loss of correspondent banking relationships. This challenge transcends financial concerns. It strikes at the heart of our sovereignty and our dignity. Our nation's struggles cannot be measured by income alone. We are vulnerable in myriad ways, and the global financial system must evolve to reflect this complex reality. We are encouraged by the recent adoption of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, or the MVI, and we further call upon the World Bank, IMF, IFI, and MDBs to integrate the MVI into their frameworks. It is not just another statistic, it is a tool that provides a more accurate picture of our national circumstances, our strengths, our challenges, our potential. Mr. President, one of the most pressing issues of our time is the rising tensions between global powers. Nauru has long believed in the importance of maintaining good relations with all nations, great and small. We are friends to all and enemies to none, guided by our national motto, God's will first. Our restored diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China are a testament that even the largest and the smallest of countries can find common ground and work towards mutual benefit. Nauru is proud of our strong and growing relationship with China, and I take this opportunity to further commend their recent agreements with Japan on the ocean discharge of Fukushima nuclear contaminated water. This historic accord represents a significant step towards addressing a pressing issue of global concern. Mr. President, as a staunch friend, we continue to call for an immediate and unconditional end to the decades-long embargo imposed on Cuba. As we know, conflicts and tensions persist across many regions of the world. In our, in our shared pursuit of progress and prosperity, it is crucial to acknowledge that conflict impedes growth and undermines community stability. Therefore, we must intensify our efforts to foster peace and development free from the shadow of conflict. Let us reaffirm our commitment to building bridges of understanding, nurturing empathy, and promoting reconciliation. We must understand that peace and development are not separate entities, but intertwined pillars of human progress. Peace creates an environment where individuals can thrive, communities flourish, and nations prosper. In the absence of conflict, societies can better allocate resources to education, healthcare, infrastructure, and sustainable economic growth, fostering the advancement of all people. Let's work together towards a future where everyone can live with dignity, harmony, and opportunity, leaving behind a legacy of peace for generations. By prioritizing conflict resolution, we pave the way for resilience, progress, and shared prosperity. We must focus on building bridges, not walls, and work towards a more integrated, connected world. Inclusivity and engagement are vital as we strive for full economic and financial participation, ensuring that no country, large or small, regardless of its development status, is left behind. This is a call for collective action, a call we must all heed for the sake of our shared future. The UN Security Council reform, long overdue, must reflect the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. It is evident that the current structure of the UN Security Council has been a subject of debate, with legitimate concerns about representation, effectiveness, and the ability to address contemporary security issues. The imperative for peaceful resolutions and pursuing lasting peace in conflict-affected regions further underscores the critical need for a reformed and strengthened UN Security Council. Let us be the leaders who bring about a new era of peace and reconciliation. In our pursuit against climate change, we continue to call on the UNSG to appoint a special representative on climate and security. We are pleased to endorse the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and we urge countries to back this initiative for a sustainable and equitable future. And we also eagerly await the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on climate change, and will closely follow and support the implementation of the Court's guidance in the pursuit of climate justice. Nauru is pleased to welcome the Pact of the Future's ambition, yet we are disappointed in the removal of Action 21. My delegation, alongside members from the Group of Friends on Climate and Security, advocated for its inclusion to address the security threats posed by the climate crisis. Removal of Action 21 was a non-negotiable issue, and despite our flexibility to compromise, it is vital to stress the gravity of our decision. Mr. President, before I conclude, I call on the following. To the developed nations, we say, recognize your historical responsibility for emissions and honor your obligations under the Paris Agreement. Provide the climate finance and technology transfer you have promised. Support our efforts to transition to renewable energy, to enhance our climate resilience, and to protect our biodiversity. And to those who seek to block our efforts in sourcing renewable energy resources, do not dismiss the potential of deep-sea minerals outright. Do not ignore the science and the progress we have made. Instead, work with us to establish the robust regulations necessary for responsible mining. In line with this year's theme, we must accelerate our efforts without delay, because the climate crisis will not wait for us to get our acts together. To our fellow developing nations, we extend our hand in solidarity. Let us share knowledge, resources, and solutions. Let us amplify our collective voice, for in unity there is strength. And to the United Nations, we call upon you to fulfill your founding promise. Be a bastion of multilateralism, the resolute champion of the vulnerable, and the bold catalyst for the transformative change our world so desperately needs. Mr. President, I conclude my remarks by reminding us that leaving no one behind is not a mere platitude. It is a moral imperative. It is a call to action, a reminder that our fates are intertwined, and the advancement of all hinges on the advancement of the least among us. This is the vision enshrined in the United Nations Charter, and this is the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals. Nauru may be small in size, but our resolve is immense. We will continue to fight for our homeland and our future generations. Let us act together with urgency, with ambition, and with the conviction that a better world is possible. May God bless the Republic of Nauru. May God bless the United Nations. Matubakar. I thank you.
On behalf of
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, as you assume the leadership of this august assembly, our world is confronted by profound moral questions that will require more than the habitual remarks from this elevated podium to resolve. These are questions about the ultimate purpose of our organization, the United Nations itself, and how it can remain relevant and resilient. It is with this sentiment that I convey to you the warm and fraternal greetings of my countrymen and women, and to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of this assembly. Let me assure you of the full cooperation of my delegation in discharging your honorable responsibilities during your tenure. In the same vein, I wish to extend my appreciation to your predecessor, His Excellency Dennis Francis, for the many remarkable achievements recorded during his stewardship. It gives me particular pleasure to commend His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, for his commitment to the cause of peace and development and the democratization of the United Nations to reflect the need to correct the historic injustice that has been done to Africa. I am also delighted to note the steadfast support given to the Secretary General by our own sister and compatriot, Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, while sharing the burden of leadership and responsibility in leading a complex organization like the United Nations. Mr. President, the theme of this year's General Assembly leaves us in no doubt that there is still work to be done to bridge the gap between the aspirations and the realities confronting our world today. It also underscores the need to remind ourselves that the United Nations stands for inclusiveness, anchored on the tripod of peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Today, these pillars of our organization are threatened. They risk being broken by the relentless pursuit of individual national priorities rather than the collective needs of the nations that are assembled here today. While commitment to multilateralism offers us the surest guarantee of global action to address the existential challenges we face, singularity and nationalism are undermining the aspirations towards a peaceful and collective resolution of such challenges. From last year's summit, and indeed from previous years, we have carried over the numerous challenges of terrorism, armed conflict, inequality, poverty, racial discrimination, human rights abuses, food crisis, hunger, irregular migration, piracy, global pandemics, hyperinflation, nuclear proliferation, grinding debt burden, climate change, and a host of other vexations. The continued manifestations of these challenges testifies to our failings rather than to any lofty achievements on our part. Billions of dollars are being committed to the prosecution of wars and the panning of the embers of conflict. Yet, we always recoil from bringing out the resources we need to build peace and to deliver life's necessities to people. The question of governance is at the heart of our problems and also the solution to them. We recognize this in Nigeria when on 12th June this year, we celebrated a quarter of a century of unbroken democratic rule. We are no less proud of this achievement than the fact that during the last 2 decades, a sustained process of democratization has swept over Africa. However, the return of unconstitutional changes of government and forceful military takeovers in some countries of the Sahel underscore the fragility of democracy when it is not backed by economic development and sustained peace and security. It is this fragility, rather than the milestone that democratic governance has achieved in Africa, that should matter most in our deliberations at this and other high-level segments of the 79th session of the General Assembly. While we are for all possible changes of government, we can also recognize the impatience in cities and villages as a sometimes slow and grinding turn of the wheel of democracy. Our people need employment. They need decent livelihoods. They desire good and affordable education and health care for their children and families. They need to live in healthy, safe, and secure environments. They need hope, and they need opportunity. They desire to live in peace and tranquility, to pursue whatever gives them happiness and contentment. When governments fail to deliver, the people are bound to question the utility of democracy and other ideals like rule of law. The global debt burden undermines the capacity of countries and governments to meet the needs of their citizens. Creeping trade barriers and protectionist policies are destroying the hopes for prosperity of peoples and nations. Unbridled competition, rather than cooperation, is discouraging incentives driving our investments. Above all, insecurity is driving people into unprecedented hardship and misery that in turn affect the people's confidence in democracy. It is the duty of the international community to bring back confidence in democratic rule and constitutional order by paying more attention to the needs and aspirations of the people, rather than paying lip service to human rights, sustainable development, and peace. We need the sustenance of democracy, not just the form. We cannot build durable societies with the threats of terrorism, banditry, and insurgency growing in our countries and regions. Indeed, violent extremism remains an existential threat to both national and international peace, security, and development. We are making concerted efforts to contain and roll back this threat. The high-level African counter-terrorism meeting hosted by Nigeria in April 2024 and its outcome, the Abuja Declaration, promises to provide solutions to the challenges presented by terrorists and insurgents. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a driver of insecurity, which also poses a veritable challenge to sustainable development. A few weeks ago, large areas of my country were inundated by seasonal flood waters, including one of our largest cities, Maiduguri, in the northeast. Other parts of Nigeria also experienced similar tragedies, occasioning the loss of lives and property. We need not remind ourselves to remain faithful to the implementation of the commitments that we all gave voluntarily at the various COP meetings. Failure to do so is merely to postpone the inevitable. No country is immune from the effects of climate change. It is better that we cooperate and collaborate to meet this ever-increasing challenge rather than remaining in our shells, waiting for the inevitable to happen. A common challenge requires a common solution. Nigeria stands ready to meet our obligations in terms of mitigation and adaptation measures nationally and regionally, with the active participation of other countries and international partners. Mr. President, conflict resolution is the main reason why the UN exists, but the task of prevention becomes all the more difficult when conflict becomes normalized, when even the condemnation of violence and civilian casualties and calls for a ceasefire are somehow regarded as controversial. As we emphasize at the Abuja high-level ministerial meeting, we must renew our focus on conflict prevention. Indeed, addressing the root causes of conflicts is often the first step towards providing long-term solutions. Clearly, some of the root causes of conflicts are social in nature, including poverty, hunger, ignorance, inequality, and exclusion, as well as other forms of injustice. In the Sudan, other parts of our continent, and further afield, foreign actors are exacerbating these tensions to prolong conflict and deepen the suffering of innocent people. Today, we are all witnesses to the heart-wrenching situation in Gaza and other Palestinian territories. We cannot discuss war and peace, conflicts and resolution, or humanitarian imperatives today without reflecting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has been raging since 7th August last year. Of course, the conflict predates this period and has been simmering for a better part of half a century. What it tells us is that the international community has failed to live up to the spirit and aspirations of the United Nations to rid the world of inequality, violence, and domination of one people by another. Justice is antithetical to revenge. Freedom is an inalienable right and a natural entitlement that cannot be denied to any people. The Palestinian people deserve their independence. They deserve to have a home of their own in territories already recognized by this very assembly and by international law, which is being routinely ignored. Nigeria continues to urge efforts to bring back on track the two-state solution that offers the prospect for a new beginning for the region. Nigeria reaffirms to supporting United Nations peacekeeping operations. We recognize the need for Africa to build strong and professional armies to meet the multiple challenges we face. Consequently, we reiterate the call for international support to operationalize the African standby force, in addition to the provision of requisite support and resources to ensure the upgrade, take-up, and effectiveness of a center of excellence on issues of counterterrorism in Africa. Mr. President, reform of the Security Council is critical if the UN is to strengthen its relevance and credibility in our rapidly changing world. Some permanent members of the United Nations Security Council have offered encouraging, if tentative, indications of support on the issue of reform of the Council. We welcome the change in tone and urge an acceleration in momentum to the process. The Security Council should be expanded in the permanent and non-permanent member categories to reflect the diversity and plurality of the world. We fully support the efforts of the Secretary General Guterres in this regard. Africa must be accorded the respect that it deserves in the Security Council. Our continent deserves a place in the permanent members category of the Security Council with the same rights and responsibilities as other permanent members. Mr. President, your assumption of the stewardship of the General Assembly presupposes that you will be seized with the progress of the implementation of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We note that most developing countries are significantly lagging behind in the achievement of these goals, largely due to a lack of resources available to finance their implementation and the burden of unsustainable external debt. It is our expectation that the adoption of the Pact of the Future for the Future will change the narrative, reposition economies, and translate into concrete measures that provide solutions to the challenges faced by developing and least developed countries. This is particularly significant in our region and the Sahel, where human development indices are low and depressing. It is for this reason that we reiterate the call by countries, especially of the Global South, for reform of the international financial architecture and promotion of a rules-based, non-discriminatory, open, fair, inclusive, equitable, and transparent multilateral trading system. We are aware of the debilitating impacts of corruption on global prosperity and national progress. Process of corruption and illicit financial flows constitute a huge chunk of resources needed for sustainable development. The recovery and return of such funds to states of origin is a fundamental principle of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Therefore, the international community must promote practical measures to strengthen international cooperation to recover and return stolen assets and to eradicate safe havens that facilitate illicit flows of funds from developing countries to the developed economies. There is also the urgent need to promote fair and inclusive tax regimes in the world. Nigeria helped introduce the resolution on promotion of inclusive and effective international tax cooperation at the UN. We acknowledge the progress made in the adoption of the terms of reference of the UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. We should deepen this initiative and work towards a UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. Similarly, we must ensure that any reform of the international financial system includes comprehensive debt relief measures to enable sustainable financing for development. Countries of the Global South cannot make meaningful economic progress without special concessions and a review of their current debt burden. The present administration pays due regard to the imperatives of creating a conducive national environment for investment and the ease of doing business. Last year, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu signed 4 executive orders to curb double taxation. The government also established the Presidential Task Force on review of fiscal policy and tax reform. These measures are geared towards not only boosting investor confidence in Nigeria, but also to ensure investors make reasonable profit from their investments. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while the world is transitioning into the 4th industrial revolution, Africa remains energy deficient. The push for the accelerated implementation of SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, therefore, must take into account Africa's precarious situation. Nigeria believes that natural gas remains central to the search for solutions to the energy challenges that Africa and the international community face. Access to affordable, reliable, cleaner sources of energy is more than an environmental or developmental issue. It is a key factor in social peace and international security. Mr. President, Nigeria remains unwavering in its commitment to SDG 13, climate action, including the net zero ambition and transition from fossil fuel energy to clean energy. As a demonstration of this commitment, the government established the Presidential Committee on Climate Action and Green Economy Solutions and appointed a special presidential envoy on climate action. We will redouble our efforts to address the challenges posed by climate change, including the urgent need to transition from fossil fuel energy. Yet, such commitments must be juxtaposed with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the relevant provisions of the Paris Climate Agreement back in 2015. The Paris Agreement provided for developed countries to take the lead in the quest to achieve net zero and to offer support, including finance, to developing countries for the actualization of the climate change goal. Worthy of note is the loss and damage funding for vulnerable countries secured at COP27 in Egypt and expanded in COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. It is our expectation that this year's 79th session of the UN General Assembly and the upcoming COP29 in Azerbaijan this November will go a step further by providing developing countries, especially African countries, with access to the loss and damage funds, including the $100 billion pledged by developed countries to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. Mr. President, in this age of digital innovation, we must address the emerging divide between the global south and the global north, which, with the evolution of artificial intelligence, risks becoming wider still. The UN should work towards eliminating barriers to digital economy in Africa, such as high cost of internet services and intellectual property rights. More so, there is a need to work towards common global standards to regulate cryptocurrency trading platforms. This is the most effective way to provide confidence in these markets and limit the potential for instability. Our own experience in Nigeria, as in other countries, shows that new technologies, when not properly regulated, can facilitate organized crime, violent extremism, and human trafficking. In our own case, the trading of cryptocurrency helped fuel speculation and undermine macroeconomic reforms. Separately, we have also witnessed in rich and poor countries alike the corrosive impact of unfiltered hate speech and fake news across social media. There is much more that we could and should do together to strengthen those guardrails that will help release the most progressive elements of the new technologies shaping our world and curb those more destructive tendencies. Mr. President, we are particularly mindful of the imperatives of achieving the advancement of youth and women as a factor in national development, peace, and security. Nigeria has developed its own national action plan on women and security, as well as a national action plan on youth, peace, and security to ensure the participation of both women and youth in the peace and security sector. The summit of the future cannot be deemed successful without setting clear, ambitious, and achievable developmental goals to address the various challenges facing our youth. In line with this aspiration, the Nigerian government will continue to invest in Nigerian youth through initiatives like the revitalization of the National Youth Investment Fund for 2024, focused on youth employment and entrepreneurship. Mr. President, as much as the global family still grapples with the crippling consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, the greatest lesson that we have learned is never again to take any health situation with levity. In line with SDG 3, we must continue to work together to ensure the good health and well-being of all. There is no disease that should be relegated to the background due to some perceived classification of their seriousness or importance. Mr. President, Migration is a complex and polarizing issue that impacts on rich and poor countries alike. Nigeria is a country of origin, transit, and destination. We are a major stakeholder in the global migration dynamic and understand the challenges and benefits it brings. Accordingly, I wish to reiterate our support for the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration GCM. The GCM, which all of us should continue to support, represents our collective efforts at providing major safeguards for the treatment of migrants. Mr. President, I will conclude by reaffirming Nigeria's steadfast commitment to the deepening of multilateralism. Just as we did 65 years ago on this podium when we joined the United Nations as the 99th member state, we remain committed to that desire to remain friendly with all nations and participate actively in the works of the United Nations, as expressed by our founding Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. It is my hope that our deliberations this year will result in solutions that will address our collective challenges and accelerate the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the advancement of peace and human dignity for the sake of present and future generations. I thank you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
And that was the Vice President of Nigeria, Kashim Shettima, representing the President of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, at the 79th United Nations Assembly, General Assembly session right there in New York, United States, talking about several issues alongside the different hopes and aspirations of the current administration in Nigeria to tackle the issues that have to do with the SDGs, as regards the plans that have been unfold in this current administration to actually deal with issues around climate change, insecurity, inclusion of women, and of course the youth in politics, security, and the socio-economic growth in the country. Well, at the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, themed the Summit of the Future, the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, delivered a speech addressing several critical issues that also revolves around global and regional lines, and he emphasized the need for multilateralism, inclusiveness, and cooperation to tackle common challenges by the international community. He also used the opportunity to stress that the Nigerian government is actually committed to embracing what needs to be done in terms of global cooperation and actually dealing with the challenges affecting the continent, and not only the continent, but the whole country as a whole. He made mention critically of the issue around climate change and how flood has devastated the northern part of the country, calling for concerted efforts from the developed nations in terms of pledges and the redemption of such to actually tackle all the challenges that has brought about untold hardship.
In valuation. But for a businessman, that is a massive
that's a
opportunity.
That's 100% return on investment. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm just thinking, but a lot of people will still argue that, look, this man, why are you looking so far abroad? There's Caterpillars.
No,
there's Katsina United.
They don't offer the same value. They don't offer the same return on investment. Yeah, until you put structures in place. I mean, the former minister, my boss on the diary, was trying to convince him at that time, but he said, look, there must be some structure, there must be some legislation. I don't want to put my money somewhere and then down the line somebody is telling you the rules have changed. So there must be some structure in place that can guarantee that when you are investing money as a private sector person, you could get some returns.
But how does this work? If a Dangote comes and says, okay, the Nigeria Professional Football League is going to be known as the Dangote Professional Football League, and I put $2 million on the table to sponsor this league per annum, but I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this.
I thought you were talking about him acquiring the football club.
No, I'm talking about the league, sponsoring the league itself.
What he wants, are there guarantees that he will get them?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. He will ask for in return
until there is a legislation to back it up.
Why must it be legislation?
The structure of the league. The football,
the statutes that set up the league.
Everything must be structured so that you can, if they don't deliver.
No, is it contractual or statutory? Because
both. Everything statutory, contractual, everything is you don't build something on nothing.
Which means what you're saying is that this has to be like an act of parliament.
It must be structured so that if they are not delivering on what he wants, he can sue and get his money back.
It even makes more sense for him to purchase a football club than sponsor the league. That's what I think.
Because they can control what he does with the club.
And even with that, you will still have to go back to what Tonya said. There still has to be some structures in place.
To ensure that he's able to make his returns. So that he doesn't just waste his money.
Very true.
He's a businessman.
Well, still talking football now, but to Africa now. Group A runaway leaders Egypt could be banned from the 2026 World Cup qualifying series. That's according to some news coming out of Switzerland. According to reports, we hear that Egypt are facing the shocking possibility of being excluded from the 2026 FIFA World Cup due to an unpaid fine. It's claimed that the sanction hangs over the Egyptian Federation, which did not respect its commitments with a Swiss company active in the organization of international matches. It is gathered that the Swiss company has an open invoice with the Egyptian Football Association, which they have not paid. And the FIFA Disciplinary Committee fined the Egyptian Football Association on August the 19th for non-compliance and gave them a final deadline of 30 days to pay the amount in full. It has been reported that Egypt has up until the last Thursday of September, that's to settle their debts and regularize that situation. It's pretty much the same thing. Football federations acting with impunity.
Maybe there's been an appeal, and maybe that is delaying the payment of all of it. But I'm sure Egypt will do whatever it takes. If it affects, they are not going to the World Cup.
Wow. I mean, there's a possibility of them going to the World Cup, and they will now be
looking good for the World Cup. They are runaway leaders in their group.
I totally agree.
I'm sure they don't want this one to
derail,
whatever.
Still talking of football now, but now to Europe. The storied San Siro Stadium will not host the Champions League final in 2027. That's according to UEFA, opening up a search for a new venue. UEFA had given extended time for the city of Milan to show that the Stadio Giuseppe Meazza, also known as the San Siro, will be available during a planned renovation work between staging ceremonies for the 2026 Winter Olympics and hosting games at the 2032 European Championships. City authorities could not give those guarantees, and the UEFA Executive Committee sitting today decided not to assign the final to Milan, and they have reopened the bidding process for the new venue. Well, the future of the San Siro, since it staged the Champions League final in 2016, I beg your pardon, has been under pretty uncertain because we heard that the likes, it might be demolished. We heard that AC Milan and Inter Milan have also developed plans to build their own separate stadiums, and that stadium, which is an iconic venue, might be demolished. Very quickly, gentlemen, this story has been making the rounds for quite a while. We heard that Manchester City and Spanish midfielder Rodri could miss the rest of the season due to an anterior cruciate ligament injury. That's according to reports from Spain. Rodri limped off during City's 2-2 draw against Arsenal in the Premier League on Sunday after going down holding his right knee. Reports following tests on Monday have confirmed an ACL tear, and Rodri's loss would be a huge blow to City's hopes of winning a 5th consecutive Premier League title and their ambitions of reclaiming the Champions League. The former Atletico Madrid player is regarded as the best holding midfielder in the world right now and has been touted as a potential Ballon d'Or winner this year after his influential role in City's latest Premier League title and Spain's success at Euro 2024. Wale, big loss for City. And I honestly believe that this might derail their title ambitions.
Yeah, we don't know yet. They started the season without Rodri. They've won 3 games. Last season, they played without him 4 times. They lost thrice, won 1, and that was against Luton Town.
So you see what I'm saying?
It's important. It's important.
He's a key member of the
But what
squad.
we know about City also is that they have strength
An
and
opportunity
depth.
for somebody to step in.
Exactly. I mean, before you know it, John Stones probably starts playing there.
I mean, it happens to City all the time. There was a time
they will be fine.
their best player was Laporte. He got injured, and somebody else stepped in, and it was difficult for him to get into the squad, and he had to go on
I think
transfer
the bigger conversation here is about, once again, how the players are playing off games. Interestingly, Rodri was crusading about it last week.
Talking about going on strike.
Exactly. His knee had to pay the ultimate price.
Village people?
I don't know. He played 50 games last season. After the 50 games, he now played the Euros as well. Then at the Euros, he broke down in the final, if you remember. He got injured.
Very true.
Martin
Zubimendi came in for him.
His body probably had been, it was always in the red zone.
But these players have a possibility of playing as much as 76 games. I don't think I watched 76 games in a year, but these are playing 76 games in a season.
Well, you could argue that the game has improved in terms of recovery rates, at least recover faster. The science of the game, everything has improved, but it's still a physical game. You still have to exert some energies to play the game, and you still have to take care of your body. So there must be some balance at some point in time, and then of course the cash that these guys are making from playing. So we must find a way to put structures and put a balance to all of these things.
I totally agree. But I also want to thank you, Tony Bitwe, for coming through tonight on Game On. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And also, Wale Adigun. Surprisingly, he didn't take too many digs. Pretty much unlike you.
About 15 minutes late, right?
And also to the people behind the scenes who also made this possible. Thank you as well. Bob.